Whether you're in North or South Carolina or anywhere else in the world, enter the Cat Cave with Ryan Frick and today with Desmond Johnson to listen to your favorite Carolina Panthers podcast as part of the Keep Pounding Podcast Network, where you can find shows like Embrace Debate and Inside the Vault, and powered by the Fans First Sports Network and on the Tobacco Road Sports Radio's YouTube channel, where you can also watch Believe in Panthers with my guests today, Desmond Johnson and Jonathan Stewart. Now, again, please welcome to the show this week, executive producer of the Keep Pounding Podcast Network, and my show, and the show here, The Cat Cave, owner and creator of Tobacco Road Sports Radio and Sports Carolina Monthly. Again, I already mentioned it, co-host of Embrace Debate and Believe in Panthers podcast. Mr. Desmond Johnson is here with us today. Desmond, what's going on, man?
Man, just staying busy. End of the Panthers regular season. Actually ended it on a good note for the first time in a long time. Feels like for the first time in like 6 years, we're actually entering the offseason with like a light at the end of the tunnel, like hope. So it feels good. Feels good.
Optimism. And I should mention, if you're watching the show on the YouTube channel, I mentioned months ago that if the Panthers signed Jadeveon Clowney, I was going to find a way to get a Carolina Panthers Jadeveon Clowney jersey and wear it on this show from here on out. And that's exactly what I'm rocking today. My Carolina blue Clowney jersey, and that will be my go-to jersey. Because again, you talk about optimism. Jadeveon Clowney gave this defense some optimism late in the season. You mentioned it. We actually got to end the season on a high note this year. So let's go ahead and talk about it as the Carolina Panthers go on the road and effectively end the season for the Atlanta Falcons with an overtime win, 44-38. Now, granted, in the playoff picture, the Falcons win, the Bucks lose. The Falcons are in the playoffs. If the Bucks win, it didn't matter. The Bucks did win. But I'm not sure. I can't remember if that game was over before this one was. Nevertheless, I said it earlier this season. As a matter of fact, after the first game, that I did not believe Bryce Young was the guy. His first play of the season was an interception that saw him sort of laugh it off to the sidelines, and I didn't think he took it seriously. Des, he's taking it seriously, man. 5 total touchdowns in this game. How'd you feel about the offensive showing for the Carolina Panthers in the season finale?
For me, this was like the confirmation of the rise, the reemergence of Bryce Young. Bama Bryce is what we've started calling him again after the past couple of weeks. And it's his swagger, his confidence. It's the reason why he was drafted number 1. It's because he carried that about him. You can see he was one of those guys that people like to follow. And we weren't really seeing that the first year and first 2 games of this season, especially. He just looked lost. And I'm irritated by some of the Panther fans that want to turn on other Panther fans because they want to be the first ones to say they were right, or wrong or whatever about Bryce Young. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Matter of fact, we wouldn't even have this Bryce Young if Andy Dalton hadn't gotten in a car accident. Like, Canales wasn't going to start this kid again this year, and we all know it. So he took advantage of a situation, and lo and behold, man, bless his heart, he actually came out on the other side, and not only has he changed the opinions of the players with him, but I honestly feel like he changed the opinions of the front office, because I do believe still, if you go back to weeks 3, 4, and 5 when Andy Dalton's starting instead of Bryce, the Panthers were looking at all options in terms of what should we do with Bryce Young? Because at the time he was broken. People have to remember what it was like at the time, not January 7th or 8th, 2025, after watching him do that against Atlanta, but what it was like in September when he sucked. He was horrible.
He was terrible.
He was so bad. He was the worst quarterback in the league. And we all, even the Bryce supporters, the diehards, were like, yeah, you got to bench him. And now it's like, oh, well, we were all on him to begin with, and y'all were saying this and that or whatever. And I was just talking to Chris Lee on my show earlier today from WRL, and he's the co-host of Panthers Playbook. And him and Dennis Cox have been the same way, where it's like, we only have to go off of what we have in front of us, like whatever we're seeing at that time. So it's kind of hard, especially as a Panther content creator, to have to be held to a certain standard where you have to just stick to whatever you said 3 months ago. Things change. Things change. It's like water. Things change. And Bryce Young, it changed. Now, were we using history to kind of predict possibly what was going to happen? Yes, because in the history of the NFL, so only one quarterback taken number 1 overall, they got benched in the second season, that actually rebounded from it and had a great career. His name is Terry Bradshaw. Everybody go up and look it up. There's no other quarterback that was drafted number 1 overall in this league that got benched in his second season and rebounded for it career-wise. You can look at the Jamarcus Russells of the world, whoever it is you want to look at. Terry Bradshaw is the only one that actually rebounded from it. And now Bryce looks like he's trajectory-wise going that way. First Panther quarterback in history with 3 touchdowns passing, 2 rushing. I thought Cam had one, but he had like a 5 touchdown day against the command. Well, there were the Redskins at the time back in 2015, but it wasn't. Or he had a 4 touchdown day, but I think it was 3.
I think it was 5, but it was like 4 passing, 1 rushing.
And 1 rushing. He rushed for 100 yards. It's some kind of record. Whatever he did that day, he's the only quarterback that's done that. But Bryce actually having this record for this franchise is actually pretty cool. Actually, I'm a Bryce Young supporter. I've been a Bryce Young supporter since the Panthers decided to trade up, and it was clear they were going after him. I wanted CJ Stroud in the very, 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 very beginning, but then once we moved to 1, we knew who we were going after. I made myself a Bryce Young believer watching tape and just seeing what he was doing. And then it was just like, he never did it. There was spots like, and I would get people would come at me on Twitter. Like, I would say, I need to see something from Bryce that makes me feel good about us trading up for him for number 1 overall. Like, it can't just be this guy that's a good player, but we need to build around him in order for him to work. That's not what a number 1 overall pick is. A number 1 overall pick, you bring him in to accentuate everybody else. You don't need to bring in other people to accentuate him. And it felt like that's what was happening at first. That game, Atlanta, on Sunday, was the culmination of Bryce figuring it out, I think, and just the beginning of it, because I don't believe that's the ceiling for him. I believe we're just scratching the surface. You get him another wideout that can take the top off the back of a defense, maybe another running back, which you might talk about in a little bit, shore up the offensive line a bit more, and Lord heavens forbid, please help his defense. Go get somebody that can tackle and put them in the middle of it so they're not running for 200 yards every time we run out there, and we might win some football games. So it's exciting to see Bryce grow from this, because most NFL players don't. Look at Deontay Johnson. Like, look how fast he fell from the beginning of the year to now. Like,
no kidding.
It just from getting benched. Like, it's crazy. So shout out to Bryce Young for doing what he's done this year and taking the leadership for this team going forward.
Yeah, I also want to shout out, and this is somebody who I've heavily criticized on this show for not being a fit in the system, and that's Miles Sanders. Now, granted, he only averaged 3.9 yards a carry in this game, but he did have 66 yards, and he also had a really big catch in this game for a touchdown in the second half. I believe that put him at 116 total yards in this game. Listen, he was banged up, missed a few weeks. He didn't have to come back and play the Week 18 game that was essentially a meaningless game outside of uplifting that moniker of being the Reaper that they're calling Bryce Young. But Miles Sanders came and did what he could on the ground, and it was enough. I mean, he did have 2 touchdowns in this game, 1 on the ground and one in the air. So kudos to him. You talk about weapons that they need to get around, or maybe adding a couple extra pieces to this offense. Jalen Coker has been a pleasant surprise, considering this guy was not. I mean, Xavier Legette was the number 1, the first round draft pick of the Panthers this season. Now, he got banged up later in the year, and if you followed him in college, he spent a lot of time on the sidelines because of injury. So I'm not saying that I'm surprised or not surprised by it, but Jalen Coker was able to step up and have a couple of really good productive games for this offense. Jatavian Sanders got banged up when he landed on his head mid-season, and I think he's still been trying to come back. But all in all, this offense is finally heading in the right direction. This is what we wanted to see last season. All we wanted to see last year was growth and improvement. And under Dave Canales, that's what we've seen on the offensive side. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, one could argue that the injuries became insurmountable for this defense with so many losses by key players. But to your point, not only did they give up 170 yards on the ground to Bijan Robinson, they also gave 300 passing yards to Michael Penix Jr., who was making what is like 3rd or 4th career start.
Yeah.
There's got to be some talk about what they're going to do to this defense. I mean, they added some key pieces. When DJ Wanham returned to the field from injury, he made an immediate impact. Jadeveon Clowney, I have gone on record many times to say that Clowney was overhyped because he was the number 1 overall pick, and so they expected him to be the next Reggie White. people want to see numbers. And the fact that Jadeveon Clowney only had 5.5 sacks this season does not paint the whole picture of what Jadeveon Clowney can do for this Panthers defense. Now, he's under contract for 1 more year, but to your point, we need to add somebody on this team, on this defense, to not only bottle up the middle of the field, to stop the gashing. I mean, I have to go back and look, but I want to say the last 10 games of the season, the defense allowed over 6 yards per carry to opposing running backs. And that goes all the way back to Rico Dowdle. We're talking Bijan Robinson. So, it's Des, what's your take on the defense? Is it just the fact that they're too injured, or is there more to it regarding the need to shore up this defense?
There's two things. Skylar Callahan from Sports Illustrated, who helps co-host Believe in Panthers with us, said this from the preseason. Really, has been on the past couple of years, but he told us that the main issue with the Carolina Panthers roster going into the year would be depth. If they had a bunch of injuries, they would have a lot of problems because there was not a lot second string and beyond on the roster because they were just starting to build. And lo and behold, from game one onward, major injuries to major players, whether it's Shaq Thompson or Derek Brown, pretty much everybody that's a starter on the defense spent some time on the sidelines with an injury somewhere during the season. And that's been the issue. They didn't have all their bullets. And I believe that's pretty much why I think EJ Evero is going to get another shot here, because he didn't really have everyone. And Dave Canales believes in his system and everything else. I will say that them retaining Evero and saying it early makes me further think that David Tepper is a man of his word, and he's not really meddling in the day-to-day affairs of the Carolina Panthers at the moment, because that clearly looks like a situation where old Tepper would have stepped in and be like, hey, I don't know about this. I know I said you were the best and I gave you all this money, but it's been 2 years. Get out of here. Like that seems like a Tepper thing. Them keeping him and just kind of being patient doesn't seem like one. So it feels like he really has truly stepped out the way. And this was a Dave Canales decision. So to answer your question, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it was the depth factor. And then some of the pieces they lost actually contributed to it too. When you lose Derek Brown, who's a top 3 defensive tackle in the league, just got paid because of it. That's a huge hole to run through. And that was week 2. So, I mean, that literally set the tone from there. Shaq was gone week 1, and it just makes it where the middle of your defense now, it's either got rookies or second-year players in it or journeymen or whatever. And it got to a point on Sunday where they were on their 6th and 7th linebackers, and the 6th-string linebacker got hurt with a concussion. So it's I didn't even know who was out there towards the end of the game, which is why the score was 44-38. If nobody could stop anybody on defense. But I think that they made a conscious decision. We drafted this guy number 1 overall, and he needs help. We've got to get the offensive side somewhat straight first. We can't just spread it all out. So this past offseason, they worked on the offense. They got his offensive line straight. I've said it in years before, and then it falls apart the next year, but I feel safe saying it this year. The Panthers have a top 10 offensive line. They have an offensive line now, and they can actually get better. There's some spots where, we'll get to that in a minute. There's some spots where they can get better on the offensive line. They can get better at wide receiver, but they did some things to bring in some stuff to help their number 1 overall pick. And now I think next year, which is part of the reason why I think EJ's still here, instead of maybe leaving on his own to go someplace else, is that he was probably told, look, this year we're going to get a lot of offensive guys, but in exchange, we're going to let you bring in your guys that know your scheme so they can still run your defense. Next year is going to be where we actually go hard on the defense and build it to the way that we want to have it built. So I think it's a little bit of depth, a little scheme. I'm not a big fan of the 3-4, to be honest. We've tried to run it 3 or 4 different times in the 30 plus years of the Panthers. The only time it's ever worked was when we first got started, in the early mid 90s. But you have to have the right personnel. You have to have a Kevin Green, a Lamar Lathan, a Sam Mills. You have to have those linebackers. You have to have a huge 320-pound nose tackle in the middle of it. We don't have any of that stuff. We're running a 3-4. So I don't know if they're going to draft still off of that next year or if they change the system or what. But it does feel a little bit like this was kind of planned out, and Evero never really worried about his job throughout this year. So I'll go with the depth thing.
A couple of things I want to touch on. First and foremost, let's stay on the defense for a second. I don't think we're taking as into consideration as much as we should the loss of both Frankie Louvu and Brian Burns off this defense. We thought that we might have some players that can fill that role, and they're not going to put up the same production. I mean, we lost two Pro Bowlers in the offseason, but we thought that we might be able to make up that production. And with the injuries, it didn't happen, right? You mentioned, of course, it's going to leave me now. The offensive side of the ball and the offensive line. There's been a couple games, this one against the Falcons included, that saw Bryce Young not take a sack. Like when Bryce Young is getting sacked anywhere between 4 and 6 times a game, the Panthers generally lose that game. Now, when it comes to like obviously supporting that offense, you're going to have to create balance in the run game. And I don't think you're going to be able to do it because even when Chuba Hubbard was playing really well, the yards per carry average wasn't there. So they were getting bottled up at the line of scrimmage. Every now and then they break a decent run, be it Miles Sanders, be it Jonathan Brooks, be it Chuba Hubbard. So they're going to have to work on the rushing offense next season to be able to create that balance to allow Bryce Young to continue to have the success that he's having. But yeah, on the defensive side, there's some holes that they have to plug, and we might talk about that here in a second. Having said that, this is the end of the first year under new head coach Dave Canales, and so I'm not sure if you want to grade it like an A to an F, but like based on this year where he finished 5-12 and essentially ended the playoff hopes for quite a few teams down the stretch, including the Atlanta Falcons. How would you sort of grade Dave Canales in year one, considering that last year we were on a new coach and he was fired before the season was over? What are your thoughts on Dave Canales' first year in Charlotte?
You know, I'm going to give him an A, and I'm going to give him an A solely off of having the cojones to bench Bryce Young after week 2, because he was at a crossroads at that point as a young head coach, first-time head coach with a $14 billion worth owner that's got a reputation of being a little trigger happy, and he had a decision to make after week 2. Bryce was playing like ass. Like he was not good at all. Like just horrible, like single-digit QBRs. Like, I mean, just horrible. Like you couldn't play any worse than he was playing.
His first pass attempt this season was an interception.
Yeah, and he smiled. Exactly. He laughed at it. It's like, what are you doing, man? Like, what's going on here? Like, it just felt like he was disengaged. And for Canales to recognize that, hey, I can lose my team early if I just leave this kid out here, and this season will be a wash in October. Like, and we got to get all the way to December. For him to bench him, to put Dalton in, save the season, so to speak. And it's not like the Panthers made the playoffs or were, chasing the division or anything, but it saved it's going to be one of those things. There's going to be 2 things here, I think. Him benching him in week 2, and then Dalton's car accident, which got Bryce back into the lineup. Those 2 things, I think, are going to be looked at in Panther history the same way as 2003 season opener. John Fox at halftime decides to sit Rodney Peete and start Jake Delhomme just to give the team a spark. And that not only rewrote that season, it rewrote the franchise's history. And I think those 2 things that happened this year, Canales benching Bryce Young and Bryce responding to it, Bryce waiting for an opportunity. He could have sulked. He could have, there's players right now. They're look at Tyreek Hill, like there's players all over the league right now that are not happy in their situations and they're telling the media about it, or they've got their own podcast and they're telling everybody about it there. Bryce didn't do any of that. He just went to work. He did the scout team quarterback stuff. He did what they asked him to do. He tried to hone his craft and he waited his turn. And karma, I'm a firm believer in karma. It came back around to him. He got another opportunity and he won't give up the strap. And it's like, good for him. But that wouldn't have happened if Canales hadn't benched him. Like if Canales hadn't benched him, we might have lost Bryce Young. Like, honestly, if they just let him try to play through this, I can't imagine him playing the way he did Sunday if he had been there the whole time. Like, there's just no way, like, for him to have been able to see his flaws as he's making the flaws week after week after week, getting dumped on by social media, the fan base turning on you. The Panther fan base is very fickle. Like, it don't take much for them to start booing their own players. And they were getting there with Bryce. So I'm going to give Canales an A for that. And I'm going to give him an A for building a culture again in Carolina. The teams that have been the most successful in Charlotte have been teams that have some sort of identifiable culture attached to them. It's never a team where you can slap it together and they make a quiet little run, or a team that's just always going to win 9 games and that's it. With Carolina, it's high or low. It's either going to be 5-win, 6-win season, we're still building, or boom, out of nowhere, 12 wins, 14 wins. Where'd this come from? Like, that's how they've always been. And I feel like they're building back towards that again. And we haven't had that since Ron Rivera. So really, if you think about it, I mentioned it on something else earlier today, but this will be the first year, Ryan, since 2019 that the Carolina Panthers will go into the offseason knowing they're going to have the same head coach, same offensive coordinator, same defensive coordinator, same general manager, and same starting quarterback. The last time that happened was 2019 with Ron Rivera, going into his last year here. And that was the last era that we had of some sort of normality. So that makes me feel good going to the future. I'm gonna give Canales an A.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for consistency, and that consistency of keeping the core together. I mean, we've seen what it's done for, let's say, the Detroit Lions, the number one seed in the NFC right now. They're 5-6 years removed from a 3-win season. They bring in a guy like Dan Campbell, and all of a sudden they are, he was on Hard Knocks. He's on video saying, "Just trust me, trust the process. We're going to get there." Like, I think that we're not seeing it, but that's what Dave Canales is saying. Like, he's had the reputation of resurrecting the careers of Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. And like, I got called insane when I said in 2023, halfway through the year, that they needed to bench Bryce Young because all they were going to do is ruin him like the Houston Texans ruined David Carr. They were going to the reason why I was worried about Bryce Young, and the reason why he's playing so well now is because of confidence. And when you're playing on such a bad team and you're playing so poorly on such a bad team, eventually you're going to get in your head and you're going to think it's you. And so again, we go back to the David Carr comparison. He was the most sacked quarterback in the NFL for like 2 or 3 years. And we were headed in that direction with Bryce Young. Hell, even this year, he had a couple games where he was sacked, like I said, 5-6 times. So the fact that Dave Canales has got somewhat of a trajectory and some sort of optimism in Charlotte is why I would tend to give him an A- as well. Like, he's obviously dealing with a complete rebuild. But again, you talk about bringing the same guys in every year. We could be in worse shape. I've given David Tepper a lot of flack on this show. We could be in a situation like the Dallas Cowboys where Cooper Rush is looking for an incentive, and the general manager / maybe worst to second, 1A to 1B, worst owner in sports, benches him because he doesn't want to pay him the incentive and says, I didn't know what his contract looked like. We could be looking at Vegas, who is looking for their third coach in 3 years. We could be looking at the New England Patriots, who just fired Jared Mayo after 1 year. So the fact that like we have been sort of like praying for some sort of consistency and longevity and like direction for a franchise, it gives me hope, considering that, again, Bryce Young could have been that next. I wouldn't call him Jamarcus Russell because at least Bryce Young read playbooks and did the work. But he could have been that next guy that just fizzled out after 2 or 3 years. And thanks to Dave Canales coming to town, I think that we're gonna get to see a lot of fun stuff out of Bryce Young for the next few years. Having said that, we've talked a couple times in this conversation about what the Panthers need going forward to build off of this 5-win team, which is an improvement over last year. If you had to key in on, let's just say, the biggest need in the offseason, be it via draft, be it free agency, what is the biggest need that you see for the Carolina Panthers going into the 2025-26 season?
I don't know if there's one particular biggest need. That's the cool thing about Bryce's reemergence, is that you can literally go best player available at this point. You don't have to go after need. It's really more what's laying there at 8 or whatnot. And for those that are mad that the Panthers tried to win the football game and did, and it dropped us from 6 to 8, here's a secret. There's not really much of a drop off from the 6th pick to the 8th pick. It's just not. And it's not like we haven't had luck at number 8. JC Horn was the number 8 overall pick. Christian McCaffrey was a number 8 overall pick. Like, it just depends on who you have in your front office and if they're good at what they do in terms of scouting talent. And I believe in Dan Morgan. I believe in his scouting team. Look at what they brought in this year that wasn't even drafted, like Jalen Coker. They know talent. They know what they're looking for. So biggest need, though, to answer your question, it's got to be on the defensive side of the ball, and it's got to be something, either another. You really want. I like Trevin Wallace. I don't know if he's your middle linebacker of the future. You really want and it's crazy to say it because they don't exist. You really want a Luke Kuechly type back there that can kind of quarterback the defense. That doesn't exist. There's only one Luke Kuechly, and he's already been here. But if you could find someone, Bobby Wagner type, that can really kind of get the linebacker settled, because to be honest, I'm not sure if Shaq Thompson's going to be here next year. He might end up being a cap casualty. I hate to say it, a little long in the tooth in terms of age, coming off a second major injury. I just don't know if they're going to keep him or not. He's not Dave Canales' guy, although he's been around the team since he got hurt week 1 and has been helping the young linebackers, Trevor Wallace in particular. But I would go either there, or if you're not satisfied with Ashawn Robinson and what he did this year at defensive tackle without Derek Brown beside him, you go find someone to plug in beside him at DT and build that front. But if you're staying in the 3-4, then you probably want to focus more on the linebacking core than you do that. So I'd imagine they're gonna have Derek Brown as kind of like that nose tackle in that 3-4 sort of. And you just want to build that core of 4 linebackers to just wreak havoc and stop the run. The Panthers last 6 games average over 200 yards against them on the ground. That is awful. That's horrible. You're not going to win a lot of those games. Although the Panthers won like 4 of the last 6 games, and 3 were in overtime. They basically let Atlanta stayed in that game in the fourth quarter when they had to go down to score. They ran the ball. They ran the ball in their 2-minute drill. And every time I'm looking up, it's Bijan Robinson literally 10 yards down the field, just like running.
Gashing.
Just running down the field. I'm like, someone tackle him. Like, you're seeing people bounce off him like a video game, and he wasn't the only one. Like, there was a lot of running backs this year that did that to us. I'm still highly upset at Bucky Irvin getting like close to 200 yards or whatever it was on us the first time we saw Tampa. And same way, every time you look up, Bucky Irvin's just running down the field. So stopping the run is the key. You're getting back Derek Brown, which is almost like a first-round draft pick you're getting back next year. So you're getting him back. Again, I don't know what's going to happen with Shaq. Some of these other guys that came in that were Ero's guys or whatever, like Josie Jewell and Ashawn Robinson. So I don't know how many are going to be back because a lot of them were signing like 1-year or 2-year type deals. So you do have to start finding guys that are going to be 4-year, 5-year guys for you in those roles. So it's got to be on defense. My hope, I know it won't happen, but my hope is that Travis Hunter falls to 8 and we draft him as wide receiver, or really we draft him at cornerback. So you've got him back there with JC Horn, and he gets about 20, 25 snaps at wide receiver also, because he would automatically be the best wide receiver on the team. So that's my hope. I'm hoping teams get quarterback crazy like they usually do. Those first 3 teams need a quarterback. I think it's the Patriots, the Giants, and the Raiders, I think it is. After that,
the Titans. I think the Titans have the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, and then I think because the Pats won. So yeah, I think the Pats are 2 or 3 or something like that. But those top 2 or 3 teams need quarterbacks, and you've got Cam Ward out there, Shadur Sanders. Trying to think of who else. It seems like it's a 3.
Quinn Ewers could be out.
Ewers, maybe.
Jalen Milroe from Alabama.
Yeah, Milroe. So I mean, depending on how they look at the combine and everything else, someone always flies up the board that's not supposed to. So I imagine quarterbacks will get ran early, and then it's just a matter of say Travis Hunter's still sitting there at 6, and whoever has the 6th pick decides they want to trade. If you're Dan Morgan, do you trade up 2 spots to get Travis Hunter?
I'll say no. I say no because we already still don't have our 2nd round pick. We finally get out of the Chicago Bears trade with this season as our 2nd round pick goes to the Bears in that deal that got us Bryce Young. But I mean, at some point you're going to have to just, I think, build organically. And like you said,
we do have a 2nd round pick. We do have a 2nd round. Remember, we got it back in the draft. We got it back from the Rams.
Oh yeah, touche.
Yeah, so we do have a 2nd. It's just the Rams 2nd. So
yeah, and well, the Rams is a playoff team, so it's going to be
it's going to be like late 20s. Yeah.
Versus like almost like a really close to a 1st rounder. I don't know. Like, to your point, I think it's on defense that we need to add. Like I watched games this year, and I watched offensive linemen. I watched running backs. I saw tight ends, wide receivers that were all bigger than the linebacking core for the Carolina Panthers, just size wise. It's going to be hard to stop a Bijan Robinson when you're the size of I don't know, like a FCS corner. You know what I mean? So like they need to add stuff on defense, and it might not just be. And we're going to go late this week, guys. So I appreciate you sticking around because it's been a great conversation. But I would even say the middle linebacking core, like the defense has been able to get after the quarterback, but they haven't been able to get the sacks. It's the knock that people have on Clowney, and it's there. but Clowney's rushing the quarterback, and there's nobody on the other side to shore that side up. They were talking about, I heard somebody on the radio talking this morning about, we can't wait to watch Penn State versus Notre Dame because Penn State's got like a defensive end or linebacker that they're hoping that Panthers sign or are drafted number 8 overall. I'm going to do you one better, and you know that I'm going to, if nothing, I'm a South Carolina homer. We've already got DJ Wanham and Jadeveon Clowney on the defensive line, and Clowney has been known to get banged up throughout the years. He missed some time this season. Why not go out and get the Nagurski Award winner, the Chuck Bednarik Award winner out of South Carolina, and go out and get Kyle Kennard with the number 8 overall pick? 11 and a half sacks. He almost broke the sack record for a single season that South Carolina held by Jadeveon Clowney. And all the dude could do was get after the quarterback. He was in the backfield all season. And so when it comes to like putting pressure on the quarterback to make them make bad decisions, it's great if you can get the quarterback out of the pocket and make him throw on the run and be inaccurate. It's another thing to get home. And if you've got Clowney pushing him from one side, and you've got, let's say, a Kyle Kennard, a rookie defensive end, outside linebacker, if you're going to run him in the 3-4, that he's going to be able to catch the quarterback on the other side, then all of a sudden they're going to have to run the ball. And that's where you build in free agency, you build later in the draft to get just big bodies in the middle to stuff the run. Because if we can't stuff the run, we can't get to the quarterback. They're going to continue to just gash us on the ground like they did at the end of the season. And I think that's where we need, whatever it is. I don't think we need to focus on offense in the draft. I think there's some free agent pieces we're going to talk about in a second that we can get in on the offensive side. But in the draft, I think we need to go heavy on the defensive side.
See, I would agree with you there with the kid from South Carolina if our pick was out of the top 10. I'm a firm believer in, if you have a top 10 pick, spend it on a skill position or cornerback. Skill position or cornerback is where I would go, unless you're in the top 5, because especially with defensive end, it's so hard to project them in the NFL, from what they did in college. And I feel like you see more bust than success when it comes to high-end defensive ends that have been picked. But then you get a guy like a Brian Burns, who got drafted in the late 20s in the first round and has been basically a Pro Bowl caliber type of defensive end. I just don't, at number 8, I'd rather roll the dice on like a Ashton Genty at number 8 and put him in the backfield with Chuba Hubbard than I would a defensive end that may or may not pan out. I would almost want to just hedge my bets. And I know we went wide receiver last year and traded up for. I'd rather go get a wide receiver at 8 or continue to help Bryce with the first round pick. But everything else after that, again, the defense is just lacking depth. They need a couple of pieces that stars, and that'll happen. And they already have a couple in J.C. Horn and Derek Brown, but they need depth, really, really bad. So I'd almost be tempted to trade the pick down at that point.
I was going to ask you that exact question. What if you got the opportunity to get a couple of draft picks for somebody that wants to trade into the top 10, and then maybe Kyle Kennard's still there at 17.
You go. Yeah, he's sitting there 17, 18, absolutely. And you pick up a third or something for the trouble, then let's do that. And that sounds like a scenario that they might actually entertain. It didn't seem like Dan Morgan didn't like not moving around on the draft board. So I could see that happening before he just went straight for a defensive end at 8. Now, if it's of course, if it's like Julius Peppers or something, you can pick him at 2. Yeah, you're going to pick him at 2. Freaks. Yeah, you're going to pick those guys and bring them in there. Jadeveon Clowney was kind of that coming out of college, but I don't see anybody like that at defensive end. The people I've looked at, we're probably about to get into it. The people I've looked at haven't been at defensive end. They've been more at either cornerback or linebacker or defensive tackle, to be honest. I've been the ones that have been popping up, but I'm not quite sure. I haven't landed on what I want exactly yet at 8. I'm leaning towards a guy, but it's really early. So,
well, let's play a little game that I thought about literally yesterday before we started recording. A little game called Cut, Sign, Extend, where we're gonna take 3 names, and we're gonna say somebody who's on the roster right now that we don't think should or will be back next season. Somebody that maybe we can sign in free agency, and then somebody currently on the roster that needs a contract extension. I talked all season that Chuba Hubbard needed an extension, and they gave it to him in the middle of the season, so that takes him off the board. But Des, give me your best version of cut, sign, extend for the Panthers this offseason.
Okay, so people are gonna be mad at me at this. Well, maybe they won't be. I don't know. They might be on the same tip. But for cut, I have Taylor Moton. And the reason why I have him, he's going into the last year of his 4-year extension he signed in 2021. He has a large, I think it's like 30 million or something against the cap or whatever, but they would save 13 million if they cut him. And if you look across the line, Moton's the oldest, well, he's 30. He's the oldest on that line, I think. And that's the one. He used to be the one that never missed a start. He got some injuries this year or whatnot. I feel like if you're going to do anything with the offensive line, it might be at that right tackle position and kind of shore that up, or center. But he was the first name that came up was Taylor Moton. Extend. I'm going to go with cornerback J.C. Horn. They need to extend him. He's going into his 5th year. This is the year he finally proved he could stay on the field and be a pro. He's the only Pro Bowler we have on the roster. And he's good. He's a top 5 cornerback in this league, in my opinion. And he finally got a chance to really show it this year. I think they've already given him his 5th-year extension. Work on that deal. Get him in-house. Canals has already identified him. Morgan's already identified him as one of those guys, one of those dudes like Chuba Hubbard that they want to have in the building. So I would expect some sort of extension for J.C. Horn, if not this offseason, near the beginning of the season. I don't think they're going to wait very long to get that together. And then sign. I had to go digging for a little bit, but one of the problems that the Panthers had this year was lack of talent in their safety room. I'm going to go with Javon Holland, the safety from Miami. He was a 2nd-round pick out of Oregon in 2021. He rated as one of the 5 highest graded safeties in his 2 of the first 3 years he was in the league. He was rated a little low this year, so you might be able to get him a little bit cheaper. But he's young. He would fit a need, and I think you could just slot him right in to Ejiro Ivaro's defense. So that would be mine right there. So cut Taylor Moton, sign Javon Holland from Miami, and extend J.C. Horn.
I'm pretty close. Let's go ahead and get one out the way. Extend J.C. Horn was my pick to extend to. I mean, preseason, I said this is the make it break it year for J.C. Horn. If he can't stay healthy on the field, then maybe it's time you move on. And like you said, he was able to stay on the field. A very, very serviceable corner. Shut down some big name wide receivers during the season. I mean, even outside of maybe last weekend with Drake London, he's done really well with some big name wide receivers, not Mike Evans or Drake London. Cut is a little controversial, and you actually alluded to it earlier. I think it's time to part ways with Shaq Thompson. He's a very talented football player, and on a roster where we need linebacking help, you would think that that's the one guy that we want to bring back. But I think over the last 2 or 3 years, he might have played like 6 or 7 games. And you can't be paying a guy that much money not to see the field, which is the same argument that we were making about J.C. Horn going into the season. So unfortunately, I feel like, you talked about as far as cap casualty, clear some cap space, let him go, and maybe get a couple of linebackers that can come in and fill that void left by Shaq Thompson. I mean, because again, we were the ones that let Frankie Louvu and Brian Burns go, despite Burns being a defensive end. Nevertheless, you let those guys go, and then Shaq Thompson can't stay healthy, and it leaves a big hole. When it goes to sign, this might be another controversial name. You talked about maybe adding another deep threat to the offense, and that's why I said add it in free agency, because you really want to build youth in the draft on defense. What about a guy named Chris Godwin? He's a free agent. He's a free agent going into the offseason. Now he's coming off a really gnarly injury in a game where the game was already settled, and I believe he tore his ACL or his Achilles one when the game was already decided in a loss for the Bucs. But he knows the system under Dave Canales. You're not getting any younger with guys like Adam Thielen, out there catching the ball. So I mean, why not at least take a flyer on a guy that Tampa Bay never took the time to shore up with a long-term contract extension? And why would they, when Mike Evans just tied Jerry Rice for the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons in a career? So, like, why not take a flyer again? Granted, he's coming off an injury, but he's never really spent a lot of time off the field. So why not add a burner like Chris Godwin to add to this already improving offense, considering he already knows the Dave Canales system? So I would cut Shaq Thompson, sign Chris Godwin, and I would extend J.C. Horn as well.
The only thing with Godwin the injury he had was a left ankle dislocation, so we don't know how much of a burner he's going to be when he comes back. And this is what his 7th NFL season. So what is he like? 30?
Early 30s. Yeah.
Early 30s. I mean, you kind of already have it in Adam Thielen. Like, I don't know what Thielen's going to do. And it sounds like he might come back for one more year. Now that it looks like the ship's kind of turning towards the, where we are. But I'm not opposed to kicking the tires on Chris Godwin. I guess it would depend on what he's asking for. If you want like an older wide receiver that would actually fit in the system, I'd probably look at Amari Cooper in Buffalo. He's going to be a free agent. He's 30. And for some reason, teams don't want to hold on to him. I don't know why. I think
there's a reason for it. Look, same thing with Stephon Diggs. There's a reason for it. I don't know. Yeah. I feel like Godwin, considering he was a teammate of Mike Evans for so many years, and both of them were very serviceable wide receivers for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But if you really want like a bigger bodied wide receiver to sort of mentor a guy like Xavier Legette, who right now is your biggest body wide receiver on the team, Godwin's only 6'1", but he plays a lot bigger than that. So that's why I'm thinking, like, at the very least, you pick him up, because you got to think of the wide receivers we've had in years past, with whether it was Terrace Marshall is the big one that comes to mind, that they were expecting to be the next big thing that never did. So why not at least take the flyer on Godwin, if nothing more than to get maybe a year or two out of him, and at least to give some sort of leadership and guidance to a Xavier Legette, who at times showed flashes of why they took him in the first round, but also at times showed that he couldn't hold on to the ball. And so I think you at least need, I don't know. I feel like you could do worse than picking up Chris Godwin off an injury in the offseason.
That's true. And to your point, I mean, would you rather have Chris Godwin coming off an injury, or would you rather place your bets on a 3rd round wide receiver that may or may not pan out?
Think about this too. At the very least, you keep him off the roster of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so you have to play twice next year.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And he tends to go off when he plays against us, it feels like. So, all of Tampa does, it feels like, when they play us. But, yeah, that's a good point too. I do feel like Tampa's going to start doing this. I thought it was going to happen this year. I didn't expect Baker Mayfield to continue playing the way he's playing. And the NFC South is just a dumpster fire pretty much in terms of turnover and everything else. But I do think that game Sunday was a glimpse of the future of the NFC South. Atlanta, Carolina, Michael Penix Jr. versus Bryce Young for like the next 4 years. It's going to be those two guys going back and forth. Atlanta's a little ahead in terms of skill position wise on offense. Carolina might be a little bit ahead in terms of their front office and kind of figuring out what they want to be going forward. But I think that those two teams, because New Orleans, the end of the road's finally here. We've been waiting on it for like 7 years. You keep kicking the can down the road, salary cap wise, extending people. We're like, how are they getting this money? Like they were the hole at the start of the preseason, and now they've signed everybody. I think all that's over. Like, I think they're finally gonna have to just bottom out. They've gotten older. They fired Dennis Allen. Derek Carr's talking about he's not gonna take a pay cut. So it's like New Orleans is get out of here. I think it's gonna be Atlanta and Carolina going forward after this year. But I'll consider Chris Godwin. I would.
As long as you've got Baker Mayfield playing at this level, I think the Bucs are still going to be in contention. Yeah. But when you look at like competitive divisions in the NFL, you're looking at the NFC and the AFC North. The NFC North has 3 teams in the playoffs, 2 teams with 14 plus wins, right?
It's crazy.
You look at the AFC North with a Pittsburgh Steelers team that, regardless of who has playing quarterback, Mike Tomlin is going to have them with a winning record and in the playoffs. And then you've got a team like the Ravens, who have got an MVP quarterback who continues to get better as a passer.
He's better last year, yeah.
And a Bengals team that, like, they struggled on defense, as they do every year. They've just fired the defensive coordinator, but like, that division is really good if the Bengals can get a defense together. So like, you look at these divisions and you look at how good the divisions are. I think there's a possibility for the NFC South to be one of those divisions again. But like, the problem is like we see a lot in college football when you play in a tough conference. There's a lot of cannibalization. There's a lot of beating each other up. And I feel like you're going to see that with the NFC South, because you've got a future in the South. And granted, Baker Mayfield is not necessarily a young gun anymore, but the guy's playing lights out, Pro Bowl caliber quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then you got young guys like Michael Penix Jr. and Bryce Young that can help carry that division, that can, again, make them one of those divisions that people pay attention to from a sense of competitiveness, But I'm with you. I think that the future, considering the youth on those rosters, both the Falcons and the Panthers could be the future. Now, we're not Kyle Pitts for the Atlanta Falcons is a completely other story we can talk about for another time.
I don't know what happened to him.
But I made it clear on a couple shows that I thought Brock Bowers would be a better NFL tight end than Kyle Pitts. And we can talk off air because there's been some at least a thought that I had about Kyle Pitts that doesn't really fit this conversation about his future, but nevertheless, good future, bright future for both the Falcons and the Panthers. We've gone super late, so let's kind of do this really quick. I'm not sure if Shannon's going to be back with us next week, but if we do come back next week, we're going to talk playoff football. We'll be a weekend past the wild card and going in the divisional round. But Des, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on based on what we know now and what we've seen and who's in the playoffs, kind of what you were thinking about what the Super Bowl could turn out to be in a few weeks.
Well, the one thing I've learned over the past 3 or 4 years, just starting off to make it easier for yourself, don't bet against Pat Mahomes. Just go ahead and pencil Kansas City in there. Like, they didn't even play well this year. Like, they gift wrapped a win to Denver on Sunday for them to get in the playoffs by basically playing the
shutout win
guys.
too.
They're like, here you go. Here's our third string guys. Go ahead and get that win, Denver. And they're still going into this. This is when they peak. This is when they start playing well. And they're 14-3. Like, and the number 1 seed, they don't have to leave Arrowhead. Like,
and they got healthy.
And they got
Remember,
healthy.
early in the year, they lost Pacheco, they lost Rasheed Rice, they signed Hollywood Brown. All of them are healthy and back now.
They're all there. And they were depending on the defense for the first half of the year. Like, that's going to turn back into that going forward. It's Kansas City in the AFC. I don't care. Lamar's going to have his shot. This is Josh Allen's last shot in their title window to try to get him. This is going to be the best chance Buffalo has, and they got to go to Kansas City to do it. It was really last year was their best chance when they were in Buffalo. But
in fairness, Buffalo knocked off both number 1 seeds this season. They beat the Lions and they beat the Chiefs in the regular season.
Right? Yeah.
So if there's a team that can do it, it's got to be Buffalo.
It's got to be Buffalo.
Like you said, their window is closing very rapidly.
The window's closing. I'm not betting. I'm not betting against Pat Mahomes in the playoffs, especially if he's got home field advantage. Go ahead and write Kansas City into the Super Bowl. The NFC side is interesting because I've been on Detroit all year. We felt like even in the preseason, this was Detroit's year to really put it together. And we talked about all the injuries that the Panthers defense had. They had the most, I think, in the league. I think they started like 80-something players or whatever. Detroit's had a bunch of injuries on defense, including Aiden Hutchinson, their best player, and they just keep chugging along. They just keep playing defense. And we saw it the other night against Minnesota.
Wrecked them.
But it's Detroit. It's Detroit. Like, I don't trust Detroit, and I don't trust Minnesota to get there because with Minnesota, the past 2 or 3 times I could think of when they've had like a juggernaut type team, they just fall short of getting to the Super Bowl. They're like jinxed or something. 98, the 15-1 team with Chris Carter and Randy Moss and Dante Culpepper and Randall Cunningham and those guys.
Yeah.
They lost in the NFC Championship game because their field goal kicker missed a 38-yard field goal, and he hadn't missed a field goal the entire season. It's just weird stuff like that. The Brett Favre 09 year with the Vikings, they got to the NFC Championship game, and Brett Favre decides to throw it to the other team in the fourth quarter late. Vikings lose the game, don't get to the Super Bowl. There's always something that happens. They had a good team a couple years back, and their field goal kicker, I think they were playing outside for some reason, and their field goal kicker like 3 field goals. Like, he missed them all. And
I know what you're talking about. In fairness, that year that they were really good, they won more 1-score games than anybody in the NFL.
Right.
They were the Kansas City Chiefs that season.
Yes.
Is what they were.
And it caught up to them. So I'm actually looking at the Rams in the NFC. I feel like they've been real quiet, but they've been really good the past month and a half. Kind of looking at it depends on Jalen Hurts' health, but Philly's equipped to do it right now. They're the 2 seed. But if Jalen Hurts is healthy, I don't really see a team other than maybe the Lions that could get in their way. But I'm kind of looking at the wild cards, like the ones that are going to be playing a wild card weekend, I should say. Tampa Bay, Minnesota, even though I just went through a rant about how I don't trust them. Those are the ones I'm kind of looking at. Green Bay is the 7th seed. It's probably the scariest 7th seed that's going to be out there. Those are the ones I'm kind of looking at to disrupt the NFC. I think the AFC's chalk. I think it's going to end up being Kansas City versus Buffalo in the AFC Championship game. Kansas City wins it, goes on to the Super Bowl. Whoever they play, I think best matchup would probably be Detroit. But is Detroit. It's really hard. It's like picking Cleveland to go to the Super Bowl. It's like it's really hard to just
Don't
say it with a straight
disrespect
face and just
don't disrespect Dan Campbell like that, Des.
exactly.
What do you mean?
People were laughing at him when he was talking about biting off kneecaps and stuff 3 years ago.
Loved
Look
it.
at him now.
Loved
Look
it.
at him now. So
I'm with you. I think there's 3 teams in the AFC that can make the Super Bowl realistically. I think the Baltimore Ravens, the Buffalo Bills, and the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's not really taking a huge risk to say. But we've already talked about it. I think the fact that Kansas City's gotten healthy, they got a week healthier because nobody played last weekend and a 38-0 loss to the Denver Broncos. By the way, Sean Payton can kick rocks. I'll be pulling against him and the Broncos every step of the way. On the NFC side, I really think there's only 2 teams. It's the Detroit Lions and it's the Philadelphia Eagles. Regardless of Jalen Hurts' health, when you've got a running back like Saquon Barkley, who the only reason he didn't beat Eric Dickerson's record for the most rushing yards in a season is because they wanted to make sure he didn't get hurt for the playoffs. Otherwise, he is your all-time leading rusher in a single season in the NFL. You've got talent for whoever's back there to throw the ball to in Philadelphia. And until they get to the NFC Championship game, depending on who comes out of the other side, they get to play at home. And I hate to be that guy, but they like to get that home cook officiating in Philadelphia when they're there. So I like Philadelphia. And to your point, the Detroit Lions are probably the most banged up defensive team to be in the playoffs right now. They did get Alex Anzalone back, star linebacker, from a broken forearm. Earlier in the year, he came back last week and just lit up the field against the Vikings. I mean, a Vikings team that they were 14-2, and a depleted Lions defense absolutely shredded them. Like made Sam Darnold look like New York Jets, Carolina Panthers, Sam Darnold again. And if the Lions can win the NFC Championship game, since the road goes through Detroit for the first time in NFL history. Aiden Hutchinson is saying that he will play in the Super Bowl if they make it that far. So I'm with you. I like Kansas City out of the AFC. The NFC, I'm going to go with the Lions for the sake of it because they've lost 2 games all year. One was in a shootout with the Buffalo Bills that saw 2 of their starters on defense go down. One for the season and Aleem McNeil and another Carlton Davis, a cornerback that they should have by the end of the playoffs. But yeah, I think the way that we talk about Kansas City getting healthy, a lot of those guys that have been banged up for the Lions could be back at least close to the NFC Championship game, if not for the Super Bowl. So I think preseason I took Detroit and Miami to make the Super Bowl, and that turned out to be well, I also, in fairness, I've got my sheet here. I also had the Minnesota Vikings at 2-15 preseason. But nevertheless, I'm excited. The playoffs are here. This is the most exciting time of the season in the NFL. That's the show. This is probably the longest episode of the Cat Cave we've ever done, and I have not enjoyed one like I have this one. Our guest has been Desmond Johnson. If you want to find him on social media, you can go on X at Des_3505.
Actually, no.
Did you change that?
No,
okay.
I don't know if you were around in the summertime.
That's right. You're not on X anymore.
There was a Bitcoin bot that got into my account and locked me out of it. And Twitter didn't believe it was me when I tried to get it back. So I had to change it. It's actually Des Johnson _35. Well, there it is right there. Des Johnson _3505 right there on X. And or you can follow us at Sports Carolina 1 for Sports Carolina Monthly. And we've got a new focus now in terms of covering ACC, Panthers, Hornets, WWE, all this stuff. We're bringing in more actual local beat writers to actually cover this stuff. So it's actually more organic writing as opposed to just pulling it from AP or whatever it might be that everybody else is doing these days. So definitely check us out over at the new Sports Carolina Monthly and Tobacco Road Sports Radio. Yeah,
Des has always been one of my favorite people to do this with. And whenever I know you may not know Des like we do, but I know how busy Des is. So the fact that not only did I get him to join us for an episode of the Cat Cave, the fact that I almost got a full hour out of Des in the Cat Cave is phenomenal. Like, let's peek behind the curtain a second. We're recording this on Tuesday, and Des is like, I have a hard out at 5. And I'm like, all right, man. And I got stuck in traffic. I'm like, oh, we're going to have to rush this. And we sit down and record. He's like, nah, man, I'm good. My plans changed. We're good. So
hey, it's the weather, man. Apparently we're getting like a big winter storm coming in on Friday and Saturday or whatever.
Yeah,
and that push stuff I had on Friday, a lot of high schools moved stuff to Wednesday, Thursday to get out of it. And so when it did that, it changed my afternoon today. So when I walked back into the studio, I was like, hey, actually, this is the last thing I have to do today. So I got all the time. We can surf for another 2 hours if you want to.
This has been a fantastic episode of the Cat Cave. And I know when Shannon comes back and listens to it or watches it, he's going to be really upset that he missed it because it was phenomenal. If you want to find me on social media, I am on X at Tapouts and Teenies, Facebook.com/Tapouts and Touchdowns, and Instagram at Ryan Frick Comedy. But make sure, if you haven't already done so, you're following the Cat Cave on social media. Facebook.com/the Cat Cave FFSN, and on Instagram and X at the Cat Cave _FFSN. Until then, thanks everybody for joining us. So until next week, you may now exit the Cat Cave, but make sure to listen to more content on the Tobacco Road Sports Radio's YouTube channel and more Carolina Panthers themed podcasts on the Keep Pounding Podcast Network, powered by the Fans First Sports Network. For Desmond Johnson, I'm Ryan Frick, and we'll see you next time right back here inside the Cat Cave.